As a Marine, I used to have the graveyard patrol shift at the Beirut bombing memorial. Part of the memorial is dedicated to a veteran's cemetery. Oddly enough, I never got freaked out being completely alone in a remote cemetery, in the middle of the night, surrounded by dense woods on all sides. It was actually kind of peaceful, to be honest. However, one night I was patrolling near the perimeter fence where some of the oldest headstones are, when I heard the sound of a woman humming. I followed the sound and noticed a light glowing through the vines and brush of a large tree. As I approached, I could literally feel my hair beginning to lift as if there was an electric current in the air. I pushed aside the brush and what I saw nearly took my breath away. It was an old, weathered headstone with a large cross etched into the marble. Only the cross was glowing a bright, vivid blue, like a neon bulb. The humming was also suddenly much louder and had a weird plurality to it, like it was coming from hundreds of voices at once. Needless to say, I freaked the hell out. I screamed like a scared little girl and sprinted back to the parking lot. I radioed the guard who was supposed to relieve me and forced him to come early, then spent the rest of my shift in a cab of his truck. I don't think he believed me, but he stayed in his truck and didn't go out on patrol until the sun was fully up. A few days later, I worked up the nerve to return to the grave, during the day, of course. As I suspected, in the light of day, it was a completely mundane headstone. There was no name, only the aforementioned cross. I ran my hand over the stone and checked to see if maybe there was some sort of hidden light source or solar panel, but no, it was just plain, solid, unremarkable stone. The humming was gone too. I eventually returned to my normal shift, but never again experienced anything out of the ordinary. I never learned whose grave that was either, but I find myself thinking about it from time to time. It certainly sounds absurd when I say it out loud, and I suppose it could have been a hallucination or a trick of my tired brain, but I don't believe it was. I think it was real, a ghost or a spirit of some sort, but I don't think it was malevolent at all. My dad's stories. He served in the Taiwanese Marines as a drill sergeant. Much of the ground in Taiwan saw violence under occupation, and it was rumored his base was built or near a mass grave. Needless to say, he's had a few paranormal stories. He had a guy report to him in the morning, exhausted but frazzled. The night before, he had been on guard duty, overlooking the firing range. The targets on the range were a mix of clay and wood figures, cut out and drawn to look like an enemy soldier aiming a rifle at you. According to the guard, when he'd been bored out of his mind staring out over the range, he saw clear as day one of the clay soldiers warily lay down his rifle and exclaim, "Damn, I'm tired." The guard said he passed out from fright. During the evening, when the training was over, the sergeants, for the most part, had the time to themselves. My dad liked to go snake hunting during dusk, when the heat was rising from the ground and the snakes came out of their holes. So one evening, he sets out, carrying a bag, a nice long stick, and a flashlight. As he was making his way across the field, zigzagging in search pattern, he found himself getting closer and closer to an old, decrepit outhouse that had been abandoned as it was too far from the main base. As he got within a few yards of it, he was hit with a sudden feeling of apprehension. Something told him going near that outhouse was a bad idea. At that moment, his flashlight, aimed right at the construct, went out. He fiddled with the battery, smacked it, and thought, "Damn, better get a new battery," and turned around to head back. The moment he turned and faced the main base, the flashlight flickered back on. Great, time to keep hunting. The moment he turned to face the outhouse, it flickered off again. Faced the base, it flickered on. He did this 2 or 3 times, got the message, verbally apologized for intruding, turned and walked calmly back to base. The base itself was surrounded by forests and mountains, the natural terrain of Taiwan. One day a soldier was reported missing. As the day went on, it was clear that he'd either deserted or was in serious trouble. A manhunt/rescue team was organized and most of the base was out searching for the guy as the rain started to come in. As night fell, they called it off and got ready to try again tomorrow. They found him in the morning, huddled in a wet, dark cave, scared speechless and out of his mind. No one was sure what he saw to cause him to freak out, and they never found out. They shipped the guy out soon afterwards. Finally, one of his years on the base, it was hit with a huge typhoon. Typhoons are pretty regular in Taiwan, especially during the summer, but this one was going to set records. Everyone hunkered down and reinforced the base as best as they could, and it held well. After days of relentless rain and wind, they emerged to survey the damage. One of the trees on base had been hundreds of years old. It sat on a hill and overlooked the base, and so had been the site of a Buddhist shrine set at its roots. Now the roots twisted and turned into the air. The storm had torn the tree from the ground, and yet the shrine itself was untouched. Even the red silk covering, with nothing weighing it down, hadn't moved an inch, despite the winds that had finally torn the great tree from its hill after hundreds of years. The soldiers took this as a sign that despite whatever would be thrown against them, their spirit would remain strong and unmoved. This is my dad's story. After he was done in Vietnam, he was stationed in an Air Force base in Greenland. They had bad blizzards often there, and when one would roll over through the base, they would shut it down and every section of the barracks would take roll call. These blizzards are intense. There were cables running between all of the buildings. You attached it to your person, so if there was a sudden whiteout, you didn't get lost and die. They had people die literally 20 meters from shelter because they got lost in the bad weather and froze. He said for about 5 months, every time they locked down for weather, they would hear horrendous screaming outside. Everyone was accounted for, so they didn't risk sending anyone out to investigate. They wrote it off as an animal. However, every time this was heard, the engine room would be wrecked. Tools everywhere, paperwork all over the floor, tables and toolboxes knocked over. Even one time, a several thousand-pound jet engine had been lifted from its workbench crane and smashed almost 30 feet away. The hangars and engine room had cameras covering every single possible entrance with spotlights that made them clear even in a whiteout. No animals, no people, no anything were ever seen entering or leaving those buildings. Then one day, it just stopped. This was not something they just shrugged at. It cost a lot of money and threw a wrench in at least one surveillance routine, which caused a lot of brass from the DoD and CIA to breathe fire down the base commander's neck. This facility, beyond military function, served as a base for a lot of civilian research as well. There was a full investigation using all manner of scientists, engineers, and specialists. They came up with no satisfactory explanation for what was happening. I do not believe in the paranormal, nor did my father. This is the only spooky story he has from 22 years in service. No one knows what happened. It was very strange in every way. Hundreds of people wrote reports and documented this. It wasn't just some grease monkeys scratching their heads and randomly guessing. That said, I spoke to my mom. She told me a couple things I missed. After one of these occasions, the U-2 in the shop had all its electronics turned on. Many of the systems in this plane were specially built for this airframe and this particular crew's mission. These systems were complex and archaic. Very few people knew how to operate this machinery, and the only ones on base that could were 2 engineers and its crew. It wasn't a simple matter of hitting power buttons and flipping switches from off to on. Another time, 3 barrels of hydraulic fluid vanished and were never found. They doubted the screaming noise was the wind because it came in short, irregular bursts and winds never produced those sounds again. They theorized it was a polar bear, but if it was, its coincidental timing was extremely uncanny. Lastly, Control picked up a bunch of weird interference and anomalous readings that, again, had the uncanny timing of happening only when this was going on. They were never able to reproduce these errors in a controlled manner.